Yes, right?
Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's time once again for Health Talks with Dr.Trinh. The one show, the only show to show you the path to a healthier, happier life, one conversation at a time. And today we have multiple conversations. Dr.Trinh, who'd you bring with you today?
All right. Hi, guys. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Edna. And good morning, Beth.
Good
So
morning.
today we have another very awesome Hoag Faith Community nurse who is actually in the field of navigating senior living and needs and things of that sort. Is that right, Beth? How do I say it right?
Yes, I had spent 16 years in the senior living industry and helping people through that journey of deciding where they want to reside, the care that they need, that type of thing. So assisted living and memory care.
That's great. Much needed. I know that as a primary care physician, I've had those questions directed to me, and oftentimes I have no clue where to send folks or what to recommend. So I'm very thankful, Beth, for folks like you who are kind of specialized with this.
Of course. You're welcome.
And can I frame the issue a little bit in personal terms here? I love to talk about my own experiences on this show, so let me share mine, and I think it'll frame the discussion here. What I went through was horrible. I'm an only child. I had to take care of my mother and father and her sister who never got married. So I did 3 in a row and helped them through that final stage of life. And when it came down to what do we do with mom, with dad, with my aunt, we couldn't figure it out. And I hate to say it, but in 2 of the 3 cases, God intervened and they died. And I always say, this is horrible to say, but thank goodness for them and thank goodness for me, because we didn't have to figure out these awful choices. And here were the choices we faced. I thought, like everybody thought, that Medicare would take care of these people in need. No program to take care of them. If you're really indigent, you could get, in California, it's Medi-Cal, but you have to have less than $3,000, and you can't suddenly wipe out their bank account and artificially bankrupt them and all these sorts of things. So that didn't apply. And even if you could, there were no Medi-Cal facilities to take them in Southern California because the cost of land was so high. Move them to Bakersfield, move them to Montana. The lots of Medi-Cal facilities there. So we were stuck with this. I'll give you, my aunt was the perfect example of this. Well, my mom and dad had a house, and everybody would just say, as my mom declined, she had Parkinson's, she got worse and worse and worse, and my dad said, I can't handle her. We looked at putting in place. Average cost, Southern California, $5, $6, $7, maybe for memory care, $8,000 a month, $10,000 a month.
Yeah.
And my dad said, I don't have that kind of money out of pocket. They said, well, you have a house, don't you? Liquidate the house. Where do I live? Well, I don't know, but you take the house. That's your only asset, and we're going to throw that just so mom can have, basic care. Somebody can watch her and change her bedpan. So the obvious thing is falls to the child. Come in with me, move in with me, mom and dad or whatever. Where? I have a 2-story house. They can't go up and down the stairs. Might take out the dining room. And who gets to stay home, my wife or me, because we both work. Somebody has to give up their job, and we have to reconfigure our house if they wanted to do it, and they didn't want to do it. So couldn't take them in, couldn't find any place to put them that was affordable, that was in reach. And the doctors would all shrug and say to me, you got to do something. I'd say, give me some idea. What? Well, I don't know. We don't get into that. But they can't live alone. They can't stay alone. They can't do this. They would wring their hands and say nothing. When they would go in and out of, my mother was in and out of the hospital 1 million times. My dad was in and out of 1 million times. Same with my aunt. Every time as they're getting ready to discharge them, you can't send them home. I said, where? They'd give you some social worker, and she'd give you a list of places, and they were all just for the affluent. They were all $10,000 a month, $8,000 a month, or whatever here. That's for that was unreasonable. So in the very end, my mom, when my dad was faced with it, she finally died, and my dad, in a weird way, sort of breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't want to go in that facility. I didn't want to put her in a facility, and we couldn't afford it anyway. And then my dad went through the same thing. So then my poor aunt comes along. She had no money to her name, no house, no kids, no nothing. And we started going through the same thing. And I finally discovered this thing called board and care facilities, which nobody told me about, which are homes where entrepreneurs rent these houses and put 4 or 5 people in there and around-the-clock staff, and they're at least more affordable. It was in the $3,000 to $4,000 range, $3,000 range here in Southern California. And my aunt's whole income was $2,500 a month. Social Security, her little tiny pension, everything $2,500 a month. So I'm out $500 a month, and she hated it, and I'm paying for it, and thank God she only lived 6 months in that facility. But what we're told is that many of these, in the old days, you say, well, I'll suck it up and we'll do it for 6 months, we'll do it for a year. Because of the advances in modern medicine, they might live 10 years in this facility or more. And at what point do they get bankrupted? And when you can't pay, my assumption, here's the last point, my assumption was, well, they're out of money, I'm out of money, what do? They literally kick them out. They literally remove them from the facility. I don't know of a more cruel system that we have set up, and a more shocking system. And I don't think any of us are ready for this. If you're affluent, if you've got assets, you're going to liquidate them and use them all. For the other 90% or 50% of people, you're either going to take them in and make it work, or I don't know what you're going to do. So address that. I mean, we're set up for baby boomers, this giant wave. Who's going to take care of me when it comes to this? My daughter's just going to liquidate the house and hope that it lasts enough and I don't outlive the money. I'm shocked. I was pissed off and shocked that nobody's come up with a better system than this. I didn't get any help from the medical establishment. I didn't get any help from anybody out there. I was on my own, and we struggled. And the only thing that saved us was, in the end, they all died. Phew.
Wow.
Happy for them, happy for me.
Beth, how did senior living become a personal experience for you?
Yeah.
Paul shared his. How can you share yours for us, please?
Okay. My father was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, and very typical. You know, my mom promised my dad I would never put you into a facility, and I always say don't use the F word. We call them communities. I try to keep it in a sense that it's a more positive environment, and fortunately there are a lot nicer communities nowadays to choose from. But again, as you were saying, Paul, you do have to be able to afford it. We can kind of get into that side of it as well, but for my father, you know, his type of dementia was very challenging with hallucinations and aggressive behaviors, and it was very difficult for my mom to care for him at home, and she wanted so badly to keep him at home because, you know, she had made that promise to him. I'm never going to move you into what they would refer to as a home. And, you know, that's another thing. The antiquated terminology for assisted living is, you know, a nursing home, where it's really not intended for that type of, it's not a medical setting. But my dad eventually did need to be cared for in a memory care setting. And I had been working at a community for a number of years by that time. And I couldn't work in a setting that I wasn't, I didn't feel that I would want my parent to live in. And so my heart, my soul was truly into that community. And I felt that they did provide a level of care that was, you know, a high quality of care. And they really did provide that for my dad. He did have to move in at the end of his life, and I was there, you know, working every day, so I was able to come and see him. My mom spent every day with him still. She would come in and spend the day with him. But by that point, he truly had declined quite a bit. You know, he had to, you know, have medications to control some of his behaviors, and he did pass away there, but we were with hospice. Our family was surrounding my father. It was, considering the situation, it was as positive as it could have been to have all of the care that we did. I always emphasize to my mom, you cannot do this alone. You need to have a team. You can't care for one with dementia without having a full team to assist you in that process.
So how long was he in the facility?
He was there a bit over a year.
And how did you fund it? It was all out of pocket? You had the resources to do that?
It was out of pocket, yes.
And can you give us a rough idea? Are you here in Southern California? My numbers I'm
this
quoting?
This is in Orange County.
So what's the average cost of a memory care
average cost,
facility?
actually, assisted living always, people have the idea that assisted living is far less expensive than memory care. But for instance, in the community I was working, assisted living could become much more expensive as you add on care. It could become very expensive in that sense. Whereas memory care in this setting was all inclusive. So you had a set fee that you knew was not going to continue to go up and up with the care.
Because that surprised me about assisted living too. Every time they touch them, there's an extra fee. So there's a basic board and care kind of cost, room and board and meal, but you got to help them down in an assisted living facility. If you have to assist them down to the dining room, more money. Assist them with their medicines every day, more money. Assist them go into the bathroom, more money. So it can quickly, whatever base price they're quoting you, can quickly.
So memory care ended up being more affordable in some cases because it was all the care was included. So it was around $6,000 to $7,000 a month for the memory care setting, and that was for a shared setting. But there was the privacy with the bathroom separating the two rooms, and so it was a very simple room. But
so if you look at $7,000 a month, $7,000 a month. Just round it up, you're closing in on $100,000 a year. If you don't have that savings built up, right. $100,000 set aside, which I don't think a lot of people do, then what are you doing? You're liquidating houses, you're liquidating assets and stuff here.
Yeah.
And some of the facilities were willing to roll. I thought this was strange. I don't know about memory care, but they were willing to. A friend of mine had to put his mother, she had bad dementia. And he went to a facility somewhere in Orange County, and they made a deal. We don't know how many years she'll live. Could be 6 months, could be 6 years. We'll take the house, and we'll gamble that will cover the cost. So if she exceeds whatever that amount of money is, we don't kick her out. But if she dies in 6 months, you don't get a refund. You take that house, and in Orange County the houses have gone up so dramatically, or in California here. And that was what he used to pay for his mother's care. Can't we come up with something better than that? Is that the best option?
Sadly, it is. You're seeing more families come in with long-term care insurance, and that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
Long-term care is something that there is a veterans aid and assistance pension or benefit that also contributes, but that's based on assets as well. But there are a few things out there that can help, but it's a tough.
So what percentage of the population that needs this service can afford this service? Have they ever looked at this? I mean, as people your father's age and my parents' age, we were able to get through it somehow. But I wonder how many people can't get through it and are forced to take these people home and improvise because there isn't a house or there isn't that kind of savings that can sustain $100,000 a year for a couple of years or more. I mean, it can easily be more. A very other friend of mine, his father had a stroke, and he had to put him into get worse and worse. He needed full care, and he lived for 10 years. They burned through everything they could find. I mean, they went through houses, savings, everything. He had to, at one point, I think they contemplated him quitting his job and taking him back home just because they're running out of money. I know money is a horrible thing to talk about when it comes to healthcare and your loved ones. They'd all look at me like, well, how can you even talk to us about money? Doctors would get shocked. I don't want to talk about money. This is beneath me to talk about money. When you're talking about that kind of money, I don't think most people have it. And I'll challenge you with this. I assume you still work for one of these facilities?
No, I no longer am in the industry. I'm now a faith community nurse at Hoag Hospital.
So one of the
we can talk about that,
and we should. But we had
should.
a number of people on through the years. I guess I was doing it for my own benefit. I'd bring people on shows and I say, "Tell me senior living options. What am I missing here?" Mm-hmm. And one of them, I took him aside afterwards. He was a guy who ran a whole chain of these things, and I said, "What do I do?" Like my aunt in particular, she didn't have a house. My mom and dad, ultimately, I could have liquidated their house, and I guess that would have taken care of everything. Wouldn't have left me anything, but it would have, covered their assets, would have covered their declining years. My aunt didn't have that luxury. Mm-hmm. And he said, truthfully, none of us are interested in your aunt. There is no money to be made in your aunt. The majority of people, there are a lot of people out there like your aunt that have no assets, no savings, and we have no answer, nor does the industry look. We are going after the, whatever that top 10% is, that has the cash, that has the assets. That's what we built our whole model around. And the rest of the world, you're going to have to figure it out and improvise. You're going to have to take them home and figure out something to do. And as you pointed out,
did your friend own the boarding care type of settings, or was he in the residential?
Yeah, full. Whatever the next one beyond assisted living is, these full care facilities, whatever they call these. Now, board and care does seem to be kind of a more affordable option. The problem there is cities don't want it. We've had lots of mayors. It's like sober living homes, so they don't want homes with seniors living in the street down the street here. They think that's a problem, and so there's difficulty in getting those approved and what. And I don't know. I assume that they're all monitored by similar agencies. I don't know if there's a wide variance in care. Yeah. I mean, I don't question the care that they would have gotten in these facilities. They're beautiful facilities, these communities, as you call it. For those that can afford them, they're wonderful. And they take good care of them, I think. It's not the old nursing homes where they just pile them in. What your mom and dad were afraid of, what my mom and dad are afraid of, these horrible institutions that look like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Everybody's just lined up and there's one person that sees them once a year. There may be facilities like that, but I don't question the value of these facilities. I just question how many people can afford them and what do the rest of us do? That's my question.
Beth, what would your advice be to give to families? How would they start navigating the journey to senior living and looking at the different resources that they have available to them, like Paul had said?
Yeah, I always emphasize, the conversations need to start early. You don't wait until the crisis. You don't wait until mom is so ill or mom has a fall or, they're in a skilled nursing and it's like, okay, now what? Now we're in a panic mode. We've got to find something. So it's having those conversations early, having when things are okay, mom and dad are doing all right, but you're starting to see maybe some little red flags here and there, but have open conversation, include them in the process. Trying to put, a lot of our emphasis has been on affordability at this, in the discussion, but, for those, I was fortunate to work in a setting where, people could afford to be there. They had options. There are some options that are more affordable than others. Like everything in life, prices are going up and up, but, I was fortunate to work with families for the most part that were able to afford the type of living that we were offering. But, oftentimes I would refer them to a board and care type of setting if they really couldn't take advantage of all of the lifestyle options that we were offering in the community I worked with. Because there is so much. It's where I was working, you could enjoy everything from, exercise classes, a beautiful indoor saltwater pool, live music every day, open bar, lots of, a lifestyle that I wouldn't argue. I'd say, heck, I would want to live there. There was a beautiful place, but, again, I was working with people that could afford it, and there were the studios, so you could start at a lower level of, cost, and you could go out, there were some people, a single woman that could afford a 2-bedroom. So, there was a wide range of affordability within that setting as well. But again, you're starting at, when we started selling, I would say it was around $3,500 a month. and then that's now gone up to at least 6.
Yeah,
So,
right.
costs have gone up over those years. So it's just.
What about long-term health insurance? And is that something we should be looking at? Is that pay? I don't know how much that
yes,
pays.
I mean, it's something that I was saying we're seeing more and more of, but you need to, I mean, typically you need to buy into that, start when you're maybe 50, they say is the right time to do it, healthy and 50. As you get further down the road, then it becomes more and more expensive. And so it's that window of when you should be getting the long-term care.
So let me ask Dr. Trinh a question. I'm going to put him on the hot seat, and I'm sorry I'm making this a hot topic here. But when does this discussion begin, and where do you go? And I'll preface that by saying in my own parents' case, they wanted to talk about it a little bit. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to hear their end of life and what was going to happen. It wasn't, we'll deal with that later. And I don't think my mother ever wanted to have that conversation. My dad did a little bit.
No one wants to.
And so when it came time, it became clear that this was happening. My mother had Parkinson's. My dad was falling. My aunt had cancer, all these things. It's clear, this is suddenly not an impossible thing down the road here. We're going to need some help. We went to the doctor. The doctors did not want to have this discussion at all. Zero. We'd sit in the room and say, what do we do? And they'd say, I don't know, talk to somebody. Who? Well, not me. Who would talk to somebody, but not me.
Absolutely. Doctors are not trained to provide this guidance, and they don't know what the resources are or even where to go. This discussion begins way too late. And I know it because, as you know, I'm in the emergency room on a regular basis, admitting patients. And the majority of folks who arrive to the emergency room who are older, above, they're in their 70s, 80s, most of them don't even have advanced directives.
Yeah, right. Much less what to do.
It tells me that the discussion never happened.
Right.
And it shouldn't be that way, but that's the reality of the situation today. And you're right, doctors are not prepared or knowledgeable to even start the discussion. But it's a much needed discussion that needs to be integrated into our healthcare process.
So where do you go? Do you go to places like Hoag? We'll bring in your program here. You have this faith-based nursing thing, as Etna's pointed out. You guys
We are definitely a resource for that. There are specialists in the field of assisted living and memory care, placement agents. There are big agencies, which I do not recommend. I definitely encourage people to speak with individuals, more private.
You're talking about a place for mom or all these things
No,
get
don't
advertised.
even mention that word.
Yeah. But I see ads for these things. We went through these types of things.
I discourage highly because of, it's important for the placement agent to know the client, to know their care needs, their finances, all of their needs. So it's, I think the private agencies, the individuals where they are going to meet with your family, sit down and discuss their care needs, et cetera. So that to me is important. There are also geriatric care managers, and they are even more skilled. They're nurses, but skilled in that area. They're going to be more of a private pay situation. Placement agents are paid by the community. So the family does not pay for that service. They will, take them around to numerous communities, expose them to their options, and then, the family can help, can make that decision. So I highly recommend families to reach out to placement agents. Some are better than others. So just, word of mouth, talk to friends who have you used, but using a placement agent is definitely helpful in this process.
So let's go through the third part of the struggle here. If it's a three-legged stool, first is who do I talk to? When do I start this conversation? Second is how the heck do I pay for this, and what can we afford, and when should we start planning for this? And the third option, which really I think is in some ways equally difficult, if not the most difficult, is how do you get mom or dad to go?
Buy in.
Some willingly go. Our public affairs director at OC Talk Radio just moved her mom into a facility. They're liquidating her house in the valley to pay for it. I gather she has substantial savings anyway. So, and it's a very nice facility here. It's a well-known facility in Orange County. And mom welcomed it, wanted it, and has embraced it. I know there are people that do that. In my own aunt's case, I think it's probably more typical. My aunt was a single woman her whole life. She's now in her early 90s. She's got a cancer. She had a blood cancer that made her very weak. She didn't produce enough white blood cells and stuff. So she's always weak. And I didn't know what to do. She didn't want to move with me. I wasn't sure I could take her in to do this, even if she'd wanted to, but she certainly didn't want to. She wanted to stay home alone, but it became clear she was falling. She was fearful. She just could not stay. She stayed too long as it was. So finally, she went in for the 18th time she fell and went in the hospital. They put her into a nursing facility for 30 days, and they made it real clear. If you don't do something, we're going to call social services, and we're going to literally put her someplace here.
That's all the more reason to start the discussions early. I mean, you have to get an idea of what, you want to honor their wishes, of course. You want to honor their dignity, what's important to them, what they value in life. But at the end of the day, a lot of, it's just digging their heels in and saying, I don't want to leave my home. But it's like, why? Tell me what do you value here in this home, and what is happening at home that is so important to you?
My
Staying
aunt
at
would
home,
call me.
Isolating, not having anybody around,
My aunt had nobody.
That
She lived out in Palm Springs area where my parents had lived. I lived here in Orange County, so I could only see her once a week or once every other week or something to get out there. I called her every day. She had Meals on Wheels. That was the only person she saw Monday through Sunday.
What type of, what quality of life does that offer her? So it's like,
nothing.
I always would, emphasize, people say, I'm not ready. I can't tell you how many times I heard people say, I'm not ready to move to assisted living. And I said, what do you mean you're not ready? It's why wouldn't you want to enjoy a lifestyle? Again, if you can afford it, why wouldn't you want to add those types of benefits to your life, to be able to be around people and have activity and
So here's my point. So I agree with what you're saying. So I tried to make that case to my aunt when we found there was an option that was affordable, this board and care idea. And I went and looked at them. They were beautiful homes in beautiful neighborhoods. And there's only 3 or 4 people in the facility. So it wasn't like you were, literally in a ward with no care. And because there were so few patients, my impression was they got a lot of attention. They did get a lot of attention. There was somebody there 24/7. So it was a nice neighborhood. You could walk out in the yard. I mean, I thought this is as close as we're going to come to the right solution. But my aunt dug in her heels and said no. And I literally forced her to go. The hospital and the doctor forced her to go. And under threat of taking her literally against her will. And my little aunt, who was the sweetest woman I ever met in my life, who never had a crossword to say to anybody, good Irish Catholic, she called me every 4-letter word. I didn't even know she knew these words. She called me everything, a traitor, and every 4-letter foul word she could think of. She probably went to the dictionary and looked up some. She hated it, and she never accepted it. And I convinced myself she almost willed herself to die there, not because they did anything wrong, just because this to her was the end. It was awful. It was not what she wanted. And
board and care settings are very much geared toward those residents that are more frail, have much higher acuity.
Right.
And it's not about necessarily the lifestyle as much as it is, like you're saying, the supervision. It's maybe 4 to 6 residents in one home, and the activity level, the level of stimulation, interaction is typically somewhat limited.
Yeah, no, she didn't go talk to any of the other patients or anybody there, and there was no.
Very different from a community setting where you're around a lot of people and activity.
But she hated. I tried taking her to years before. We visited every community for years, and she hated that too. She hated losing her independence. And I said, "But you have friends, you have social." And I don't care. It's not my. Not mine.
And it's not for everyone. Like I was saying, you have to honor their, what if she's never been a social person, you can't expect her like, all of a sudden she's going to become social because you put her into a community. She may still isolate in a community setting. And there's people that way, that you can't change them.
So I get that I get who they're built for. I get there's a population that welcomes it and they get treated wonderfully and they have, thank goodness, the affordability to pay for it. I think there's a lot of people that don't have the affordability to pay for that
Yeah.
lifestyle, so they're going to struggle to find something else. And even if they do, I think you're still, for the most part, my mother-in-law, again, fought like heck. This was back in Pennsylvania, where it was in a small town. Much more affordable care was available there. It wasn't costing money. She just dug in her heels. No way, no how, ain't going to happen. And it divided the family, where the sisters were fighting and saying, well, you got to do something. And the other one saying, no, under no circumstances.
That's the other side of it, getting everyone on the same page and on board with decisions.
And again, to everybody's, I guess, relief, Mom died one night in her sleep. And so that decision never had to be made. And Mom was spared the trauma, the family was spared the trauma. And yet I wonder, those final years of her life, she was isolated, she was alone. This is in Pennsylvania with snow, and she'd be snowed in for weeks on end and stuff here. And I thought the quality of her life could have been so much different had she somehow accepted this reduction in space, but increase in community, this access to more people. Maybe you're only living in a 1 or 2 room thing instead of a house now, but you're not alone and there are people around. I don't know how to, I never figured out how to navigate that journey. I welcome any thoughts that you can survive. Certainly have the conversation early. Certainly go look at these options, and certainly think about the money early, because the money's going to shock everybody here.
Right.
Beth, how would you, as a faith community nurse, or any of the faith community nurses, be able to start a conversation early? How do you train other faith community nurses to do that?
Well, I mean, anyone with aging parents, you need to recognize that is inevitably going to become a concern, an issue that you'll need to handle. So it's don't avoid it. Don't, just like Dr. Trinh was saying, I mean, no one wants to talk about end of life. Many of us don't. Having your advanced care directives, those are topics that, no one wants to discuss. And yet, they have to be brought up somehow. And that is just, it's initiating those conversations with your siblings, with your parents, whoever, is involved in that discussion. But it's not to be avoided, and yet it is. So I think, just finding ways to bring up the conversation, and starting to look at places, look at the options, and we're not making a decision tomorrow. I had clients I would work with for 10 years before they'd make a decision. They'd started, considering it, 10 years ago, and then finally, oftentimes it was a crisis, unfortunately, but at least they knew their options. They'd done their research, but just, taking those baby steps, getting those conversations started.
So
more. Education is the key to start the families, and when you see the need happening, or you see some dementia, some signs and symptoms, is education one of the first things that we do as faith community nurses in the congregations and communities? Is that something that we need to do and need to focus on with our other faith community nurses?
Absolutely. It's getting the word out. It's education. Absolutely.
One of the things that struck me I'm sorry to cut you off, but one of the things that struck me in earlier conversations about this faith-based nursing was the fact that you're looking out for the lost. You're looking out for the ones that fall out. We haven't seen Susie at church in a while here. What happened to Susie? Should somebody go check on Susie and see if she's still alive or if she needs help or whatever? Because that's another, I'm sorry, I'm painting a dire picture here, but there's another population. You're talking about families that can have a discussion, and there's people to help and to take care of this and maybe pay for it and figure it all out. All that's great. I'm hearing there's more and more seniors that are alone.
That have no one.
No one. Divorce. Children move far away, didn't have children, all this stuff. But for me, my aunt would have been one of those. And I don't know that anybody would have ever even noticed she was alive or dead until someday somebody went in and said, well, we haven't seen her in a couple of weeks here. There was nobody to have the conversation with. There was nobody to help. There was nobody to to be there for them. Are there a lot of people like this? I suspect there are.
Absolutely, and that is a big concern. We talk about that in the faith communities where, you can only be so aware of, who's coming to services, who's at church, who's coming to church, and COVID put another whole
Yes.
Concern on that. People are still not coming back to their faith communities. They're, whether they did it remotely or not, but still you're not seeing the numbers. And so, who is at home, who needs that help, and trying to identify those people is a huge challenge.
So what do we do with that age of population who are hanging out, or barely making it, where my aunt was living on $2,500 a month? That was her whole, and she had no savings. I think she had $10,000 or $15,000 to her name. No house, no family, no nothing. I suspect there are a lot of people like that out there who are one step above poverty, or clinging on, and they're holding on with their fingernails. And I don't know where they would go. I don't know who'd help them. I don't know who'd even pay attention to them. And I suspect there are a lot of them out there, more than we know, and we don't see them because they're somehow surviving. And I'm not even talking about the homeless and the street people and stuff. I'm just talking about people that are living in that apartment complex down the road there, that little old man, that little old lady that you've seen a couple times, but nobody ever goes and talks to them, and nobody really knows who they are.
Does that safety net exist at all for those folks who are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, who live on their own and just surviving on Social Security and things of that sort? Does that safety net exist that we're aware of?
I don't think it does, but I'm hungry to hear what you guys say. I think you, at least the fact that you pay attention to them and look out for, and try and open an eye where the rest of us ignore it. I don't ever go ask who that little old lady is down there and go get to meet her. I'm too busy.
It's a team. It's definitely a team effort, like you're saying, between the physicians, between the faith communities, between, just people talking, neighborhoods, people communicating with each other. It's all about keeping in touch. And, that's all we can do is keep talking to each other, keep educating.
What about, and this is a horrible thing again, but one of the things we thought about is moving mom, dad, or my aunt somewhere else. Now that means we're not going to see them very often, but there was maybe someplace else. My aunt was from Minnesota, and there were a few distant cousins and stuff, and they said, well, we'll help, and the cost in Minneapolis was a fraction of what it was here. She could live in one of these really nicer community places for $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month. It was half of what it was here. Is that an inevitability? Are we going to sacrifice seeing mom and dad in their final stages to simply, or are people, as a societies, are we going to round these people up and put them in facilities? What are we going to do? Is that an option?
In Amsterdam, they did a research project with university students, and when the elderly were in a community and they were isolated, they didn't know how to use smartphones, computers, any of that type of thing. So what they did in this research project is they brought in students from different universities and had them live in the community with the elderly.
There you go.
And they learned from the elderly, and they also taught the elderly how to do different things.
Right.
So the elderly ended up with like a grandchild type situation.
Exactly.
Where they could actually reach out to. And they found that this really, really helped break the stigma between the younger people and the elderly. And that was something, I'd love to see something like that happen here.
That's what I was getting at, because I've heard of these types of things. I've never seen one, but somehow you're getting younger generations to older people to volunteer and work with kids and maybe teach them, or in reverse, sort of younger college students coming out to help and see more than Meals on Wheels, more than just stopping by and helping, but somehow an interactive program that encourages people to look out for each other. Because I'll make one more little soapbox speech here. I think this started a long time ago. I'd be curious, Dr. Trin's thought. we as a society a long time ago stopped saying we're going to take care of our elderly parents. When my parents were young, that was the assumption. There was no facility. There was no network. When mom and dad got old, somebody was going to take them in and take this burden and bathe them and take care of them, pay for them. Now, maybe that didn't have to go on as long because people died in their 60s or 70s. Now they're dying in the 90s or 100s. But it was still the idea that would, and Dr. Trin's from a Vietnamese family. My perception is most Asian families still do that. The assumption is that we don't ship mom and dad off somewhere. Somebody's going to make this out. Somebody's going to take care of them. We, as a Western society, gave up that idea long. We'll talk about that, Dr. Trin. Am I right or am I wrong? Is it different?
No, it's a culture, and if you go to Vietnam today, there's no such thing as a nursing home, or throughout Southeast Asia. It's a cultural thing. I think it's not necessarily because well, it's because the definition of family is different. The definition of family in the United States is mom, dad, children,
right?
And under one roof,
right?
In other countries, the definition of family is grandparents, their kids, the grandkids, and even the great grandkids under one roof.
Yeah,
it's how we define family, and because of how we define family, it's just one unit under one roof, and it could be because many of these other countries are more poor when you can't afford to even move out, or have your own bedroom, right? And so as a default, family lives together to sustain each other economically.
Right.
And in the meanwhile, we just take care of folks until they pass away at home, whether it's grandma, grandpa, or whoever it is, and it could be a default thing economically.
So I wonder if we're going to come back to that. I guess that's my point. There was a movement. It hasn't really done much, but we've done some shows on it. This whole movement of ADUs, auxiliary dwelling units, a granny shack that you put in the back of your house. State has opened the way to build more of these. Cities are begrudgingly accepting it. They hate the idea of more density in neighborhoods. But there's particularly some of the older areas where they had more land, the north part of the county as opposed to the south part of the county when the houses were built with bigger lots, the Santa Ana, Fullertons, Orange areas and all this stuff. And that was all built around this premise that we're going to have to take care of our older again, where we can't outsource this. Maybe they don't want it, maybe we don't want it, but maybe, for all the reasons we've talked about, this is going to come back to us. And there was a big housing development a couple of years ago in Irvine that sold out, and it was primarily aimed at Asians and Chinese, and particularly Koreans, and they all had ADUs built into them. They all had a little granny shack in the back. That was the popularity of that. Talk about that. Are we eventually going to have to stop outsourcing this and bring it back in? Do you think that'll happen?
I could see that happening. A dear friend of mine does a lot of work with end of life, and also as a side job, he's gotten into construction, and that's their big focus is those ADUs. Right. And it makes sense on one hand, and keeping family together, which is a wonderful thing, and whether that families can pull that off. If adult children are still working all day long, then there's still the concern of, well, who's watching mom or dad while they're working? Right. So there's still a need for care. And we can't do that if we're working full time. So I always say it's definitely reducing costs in a sense, but it's there's still going to be the concern of care.
And I wonder myself, I'm in my mid 60s, and they tell me the good news is I'm going to live to be 95. I might be 100. My aunt was, my dad was. The bad news is I'm going to live to be 95. I might live to be 100. Who is going to take care of me? I only have one child. And she works.
That's why you're supposed to have more children.
Yeah, maybe that's part of it
We
too.
had one, Paul.
Come stay with me. We have a room.
We got a room for you, Paul.
Yeah.
But isn't that typical? Aren't more and more people either no kids or one kid, maybe two kids? I mean, we've shrunk the size of the family
Yeah,
down
that's
through
right.
the years. And then the downside of it is, who the heck's going to take care of me? I don't know. I worry about
Well,
that more and more.
That's the way it is in Africa. That's why they have more kids. So that child will take care of the elderly. They look at the older people. That's the mentality in Africa. Is that
Right.
my family will take care of me.
Right.
So I'll take care of them. They'll take care of me. The
Right.
same growing up in Ireland.
Right.
One of the reasons why I became a nurse is because my grandfather lived 10 minutes away from the home. He didn't want to give up his independence or his home. My grandmother had passed away and he lived alone. And so I went every evening down to fix his meal, bring the meal to him, fix his meal, get everything ready for the next day, take care of his wound on his leg. And the nurse had taught me how to do that.
There you go.
And took care of him, and we had long conversations. That's the beauty of spending time with the elderly, is those long conversations. Yes. And learning from them and listening to them and having them tell us the story. That's why I'm a missionary today, I believe, because my grandfather told me about his work in the Boer War. The value, I think what we're missing, not being close to our elderly, is the value of that connection and learning from them and hearing their stories. And, that's actually directed my life path. And that's why I ended up where I am.
Now, you sent all our listeners to Google to go look up the Boer War. As a history buff, I can tell you that was in the late 1890s. It was in South Africa against the Dutch settlers, rose up against the English, and there was the Boer War. And I know that because one of my relatives, supposedly on my mother's side, fought in the Boer War, and so we heard about that. It was the precursor right before World War I. It was kind of the early conflict that showed us the horrors of modern warfare here. Machine guns and all the things that they introduced in that conflict. Anyway, I think there's a circle coming back. I got to believe for those who can afford it, these communities, I've seen them, they're wonderful. They offer tons of amenities, and if you can get them to buy in and accept it, it can be a good quality life. But I say few can afford that. So they're trying to come up with other creative options like board and care facilities that are less expensive, less of a community, but still round-the-clock care. And I think as a society, we're going to have to face up that maybe the days of outsourcing this, we've reached a pinnacle, and we're going to have to start bringing some of this back in again here. However that works, in a world where two people work, I don't know how it works. But somehow, maybe it's bigger families or maybe more extended families like Dr. Trin's talking about here, but somehow I suspect we're going to be forced to bring this back in, because otherwise we're all going to be alone, clinging on, and other than you guys out there, the good work you do, saying, where's Paul? I haven't seen Paul in a while here. I don't think too many people are going to be thinking about old Paul or looking for old Paul here.
Beth, what are some of the stigmas that still exist regarding senior living?
Oh, I mean, we've kind of talked about the terminology and how people view. I mean, our parents' generation, it was the nursing homes. It was the negative, put them in a room and never look at them again. And
right.
And that's fortunately there are more options now, and having it not be a medical setting, having it be a more of a community lifestyle type of setting. So it's getting past that, and that's what I was saying. The education process and getting out and looking at options is key.
And what's the average stay now for those that do make this move into a board and care, into a facility? My father used to quote this as he was looking. He said, many years ago, the average stay was less than 5 years. By the time you made that decision, life.
I think it's still shorter than you would expect because people wait and wait. They still continue to wait. They're not ready. Memory care is much shorter, of course. So, depending on the community, depending on the setting, but I would say 3 to 5 years is probably average, and memory care can be as short as average of 18 months.
Right.
Or less.
But the only reason I ask is because our lifespans are extending. So
Right.
I wonder if these stays are extended, like my friend's case where he put his father in, I think he was in his 70s, not knowing he was going to live to mid-80s here. I think it was like 15 years he was in one of these facilities here.
There's 10,000 people aging into Medicare every day.
Yeah.
Wow. Dr. Trinh, what are some of the things that we as faith community nurses can do to assist and educate physicians on,
Please,
before we get into the situation where they go to you when it's too late? What are some of the things we can teach, the physicians? What can we do education-wise to help? What can Beth and I do to help them?
Physicians need a phone number and who to call when this question comes up.
Yes. Really? Somebody they can.
Community nursing.
Where the docs, honestly, they're not going to they're not going to provide this conversation because there's only 10 minutes to see the doc, right? And they're too busy taking care of why you're in there and your health and your issues. So they're just going to give you a phone number and who to call. So if I was, Faith Community Nursing, create a flyer with that phone number and who to call whenever the question comes up, and distribute that flyer to medical offices and the community.
And I would think the doctors would welcome to, because they're so uncomfortable. At least my experience was they didn't, not just because of time, not just because of lack of training. This is not, I can't help you anymore. This isn't what the conversation I want to. I'm here to help you. I'm here to save you. I'm here to do something proactively. When it's clear that I can't help you, I hate to say it, most of my parents' doctors really pulled away. They didn't want to see him as much.
They don't know where to start, and it's a 30-minute conversation that they don't have with a patient, and so they need that resource on who to call. Here's the phone number. It's no cost, and have that conversation. So I would get that flyer and distribute it from Faith Community Nursing.
And the other thing I think you guys should talk about is not today because we're out of time, but in the future of the conversation is hospice, that end of life program that's being offered more and more, where it's clear you're not going to a doctor anymore. You've only got a certain amount of time to live, 6 months, less than a year to live. When they morph into some of these things, my aunt did that, and what a wonderful thing! All of a sudden, there was a lot of people coming to help, not just faith-based
education
people.
Again, educating people on what is hospice, what is palliative care,
Right.
and when do you start having those conversations?
Yeah, I don't think most people even know that exists. Right.
Yeah,
and I think that's a wonderful resource too, because it's a very difficult, that last stage of the journey here can be awful, or it can be lonely, or it can be, there are people who can help the family, help the patients, help everybody deal with this more. And again, in a society where faith is less and less practiced, I just wonder how people die today here. I'll give you one last shocking statistic. I said this before on one of the shows Aetna did. When my aunt was in a board and care facility, it became clear she was dying. They called me up and they said, "This is it. If you want to see her, you better get here." So I got my car, drive out there. And when I arrive, it's night. She's still alive, but she's in a coma. She's been in a coma all day. And the nurse who didn't know me was there, the hospice worker, and says, "Is this your mother?" I said, "No, this is my aunt." "Your aunt? Why are you here?" "It's my aunt. I love my aunt. I took care. She's a great lady." I said, "Why do you ask?" She said, "Because nobody comes. Nobody comes. We usually do this all alone." Even when they're, and I thought, wow, have we gone that far? We can't even face it or deal with it, or we really outsource this thing. Take care of it to the final moment, and then call me when it's over. I'll shed a tear and get back to work here. I think that there's too many people dying alone these days.
Yeah. And that's what we don't want to do as faith community nurses. We want to be able to educate. We want to be able to assist, and anything that we can do to help with that. I think, Beth, you can speak to that as well, right?
Absolutely. Just honoring our elderly. I mean, that's something that honoring authority and elderly and keeping that, bringing it back. It really, it's something that I think we've really lost. And I think valuing our elderly, we're all living longer, as you said, so we're going to have a lot more time to value our elderly and respect them and all the wisdom that they bring to us. And that was the greatest gift I received from being in senior living was that time with people and knowing that they were at their final years or days and just, the gift of being able to be with them and share stories and just be there to listen. And I think just, that can be a big message that as faith community nurses that, keeping that alive, keeping that knowledge that, we have a huge population of elderly that, we're going to be serving and to, continue to keep them at the forefront of our mission and what we do.
Well, I hear the one word that runs through all this is fear. Fear of how am I going to pay for it? Fear of when am I going to start this conversation? Fear of how am I going to face this? Fear of being alone. Fear of dying alone. Fear of being there when they're dying. I can't face this. I can't deal with this. All this stuff. It's because it's a taboo topic. It's the last taboo topic. We can't talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to think about it.
A lot of talk.
Yeah.
A lot of talk about it.
All right. Well, thanks for starting the talk today here. How do they reach you if they want to find out more information about the good work that you do?
I'm at Hoag under the Spiritual Care Department and Faith Community Nursing at Hoag Hospital.
Wonderful program.
Just there.
Welcome what you guys are doing. Love to see more of it out there, and I'd love to share the word.
Let's do a segment and have you guys come back. Let's do a segment on valuing the elderly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Let's do it. We'll put it on the schedule.
I think that's a powerful thing because I don't think we see value in the elderly. There's something to be managed and taken care of and housed and removed. They're of no value anymore. They're just simply a cost and a burden. And we don't see it, and they see themselves that way to a certain degree because we don't value them, and they have a lot of value still to bring.
They do.
Absolutely.
Right. Love
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate the opportunity.
Take us out, Dr. Trinh. Final way.
All right. Great chat. Very stimulating discussions. Lots to think about on this tidal wave of retirees coming up in the next 20 years here. And are we going to outlive our resources? Very scary things to think about.
Right.
But thank you for shedding light on this, guys. And we'll have you guys back and let's chat about valuing the elderly. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Dr. Trinh.
Well, there you have it. One more reason to tune in. Here's a conversation not enough of us are having. But it's the kind of talk we do here on Health Talks with Dr. Trinh, streaming live from the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.